start. Okay, thank you, Ian. This is broadcasted and taped for history. And so what we'll do today is this will be for some of you the first actual presentation of our thoughts around the new strategy. I'll try to limit myself to about 30 minutes, and then we have one important, particularly important for many colleagues, component of the strategy is, of course, the initiatives in the next strategy period and how we think about that. So Åsa will come in and present the basics of that. I saw you just you were able to send out the call for proposals now. So opportunity to connect these two processes, which is, of course, very important. You've seen an annotated outline, and you've seen a timetable that has been circulated earlier. Today is an opportunity for me to explain some of the thinking a bit more, and also perhaps take a few questions of clarification. But there will be other opportunities to feed input into the process. And I am visiting and making presentations in different centers at different points in time. So if we don't have time for all questions today, there will be other opportunities. So we are planning to develop another 5-year strategy. It's a good long time frame, which enables us to negotiate core agreements with SIDA in particular. And this is going to be sort of the foundation for our core funding moving forward. So in a way, it's extremely important to me, and for some of you, it might not be changing your realities too much, actually. But I think it's important that everybody has a grasp of this bigger picture. I will start by saying a short word about the current strategy. You may recognize this pyramid with the 3 pillars of results: scientific research, policy engagement, capacity development. And then we have 4 areas that are more organizational or enabling factors. And we've tried over this period of time to use this as a basis for our results reporting at the institutional level. Centers, initiatives, and major programs are reporting results according to this kind of framework. And what have we learned about this strategy so far? Well, I think we have a number of strengths that we should actually hold on to and keep with us when we move into the next period. For example, we were able to, for the first time actually, provide some clear goals for the organization which can be followed up on. We can monitor both quantitatively sometimes and qualitatively our achievements. There's a certain logic to the strategy. It is kind of, the whole strategy document is these 7 chapters, and it kind of makes it easy to understand what we are trying to achieve. You can also distinguish responsibilities in the results areas. We introduced the concept of outcomes that we have then applied in the outcome mapping approach. We keep it quite flexible in the content areas. So the current strategy doesn't really explain very much what environmental challenges we are focusing on, or what kind of methods that we are investing the most in. It is a bit agnostic at the level of content, and it operates more at the meta level. Strengths and weaknesses with this, actually. Because obviously we don't know exactly what content areas, what challenges will emerge over a 5-year period, and we need to be adaptive. Not lock ourselves into rigid programs. So, but we've also found some weaknesses that have been found by ourselves, but also noted to us by external stakeholders. It's not clear what we are actually here for. The actual impact of SEI as an organization is not articulated in the strategy. what is sort of the long-term purpose of having SEI in terms of changing things in society. It doesn't have a theory of change, so it doesn't explain what we are about in terms of how we work to achieve these impacts. It doesn't really connect between, this should be here, between results areas. So we say we have scientific research, policy engagement, capacity building. But of course these are connected, and most of our work is actually mixing these or combining these in different ways. That's absolutely not clear, current strategy. Well, I think the jury is a little bit out on this one, but I would argue that, okay, most in the management know and understand strategy, but perhaps it's not so widely known, understood, or embraced across the whole organization. And critically, actually, it's linking to this. It's quite inward-looking. It talks about our organizational goals, even in the results areas, such capacity building, policy engagement, and scientific research. It talks about like what we will become better at, or things like that. That doesn't really tell the audience what we are achieving outside in the world with these activities. So we want to, of course, address these weaknesses. We want to keep the strengths moving forward. And it's useful to think about what we have. Why do we need a strategy? I think there are three main purposes. And the first one is to articulate the strategic priorities for the coming period. Simply put, these are the places where we will invest, where we want to drive actions in the organization. And this is sort of kind of like the business approach to a strategy. I think it also has a very important purpose to be a basis for our common understanding inside the organization, our purpose as a SEI, our identity, and our values. And thirdly, to provide a basis for core support. So here comes the sort of non-profit development corporation type of organization, where you have this kind of purpose, that we need to have a results framework, we need to have a solid basis for follow-up and annual reporting, etc., which our big donors and core supporters push us to do. So these three purposes are sort of the guiding principles for the development of the new strategy. And this means, for example, if we are to articulate our strategic priorities better, we need to clearly describe the strategic areas a bit more than we did in the previous strategy. There's also been question about describing more our regional focus, coming from outside SEI. What is it that you are trying to achieve, for instance, in Eastern Africa, Southeast Asia, Western Europe? So it's a bit different what we are doing in the different regions, and we should be able to articulate our ambitions better. When it comes to our own identity and our purpose as an organization, I draw the conclusion that we need to rebuild the narrative about SEI and where it comes from. It actually originates not from the city of Stockholm, but from the Stockholm Conference in 1972, which sets out the first UN agreement and agenda on the connection between human and the environment, or if you want, environment and development. And this is the foundation for us. And of course, the world has moved on since then, but if you look at that Stockholm 2072 declaration, it makes a lot of sense still today. There are certain issues that are not so strong back then, like, for example, climate change or gender. But there's a lot of the foundation that is useful to go back to. And that this is quite important today when you have the relativization of knowledge, and that different actors that we might collaborate with, whether it's states or private sector actors, make their own interest-based interpretations of sustainable development. We need to know where we stand with our reference base. We should also have a clearer understanding of our long-term impacts in society. in these big development and environment objectives. And we need to provide better systems for organizational learning and knowledge sharing to strengthen the glue inside the organization. Thirdly, the third purpose, we need, I think, a new theory of change and a new results framework based on that theory of change, which is not a straitjacket for activities, but it's a frame which is sufficiently broad to be able to be relatable for all SEI activities, but still gives a sense of what we are about and what we do. We need to make a better, clearer separation of our internal enabling goals and our external outcomes, and this comes into the theory of change as well, which I will explain in a little bit more detail. And we need to sort of create a significantly better monitoring, evaluation and learning system, including performance indicators, but also understanding the qualitative nature of many of our outcomes. So for me, these have been key principles to try to live up to in the next strategy period. We keep our credibility as a science-based institute. This is our identity. This is the basis for us. This is our niche. And a little bit uniquely in the international landscape, we have this, our own scientific research base. We have legitimacy by being grounded through our regional partnerships. And well, basically through our partnerships, but also through having the offices around the world. And we are relevant. We stay relevant by being able to innovate and adapt to new agendas and new challenges that emerge. Building on that foundation, I think we have an interesting and somewhat special niche to be empowering our partners by providing tools that others can use. We don't build our sophisticated models to keep in our own house and sell them as services, but we are trying to empower others to solve their problems in the long term. We try to maintain the idea of using initiatives as a way to have longer term engagements, possibly using them as sort of glue between projects and beyond projects when often impacts are within reach, sometimes after projects end. And we keep our momentum in terms of going outside the environmental policy box and working both with other parts of society, other parts of government that have an impact on environment and development, but also, for instance, the private sector, which is unavoidably a big change agent when it comes to sustainability. We are maintaining a kind of a networking model in parallel with our organizational line management. We are networking across teams, across centers, cross-fertilizing and innovating in this way. And we are trying to develop some tools that make it more efficient and predictable and coherent how we work. So, for example, the SEI project model that's been developed here in Stockholm in the last year is an example of how we need to work more to unify our language and the way we work. And a strong emphasis on the human resources, the people that are all here in the room and online. This is the only resource we really have. We have some offices and laptops, otherwise it's the mind, creativity and inspiration of our colleagues that drive the Institute forward, nothing else. So with that as a basis, I have proposed this outline, and today we might not need to go into all of it, but I'd like to focus a little bit on the first parts here today, and also explain a little bit around the thinking around the theory of change. And then some of these pieces will be subject to center workshops where you will be able to discuss in more depth your ideas and input into these critical sections here in the middle between 3 and 6. So, as I said, well, we can skip this, is just the preface. But the mandate and the purpose of SEI, to bring back a little bit the origins. We actually have statutes that very few people have seen, which is the origination of SEI, what we are supposed to do. But we can keep those statutes. We're not changing them because they have been set by the Parliament, so it's not something you easily change. I also suggest we don't change our mission statement. We think that it's still very relevant. But as I said, we can be better at explaining the original principles of SEI. Our identity grounded in this Stockholm Declaration through to the 2030 Agenda, that we are focusing on innovation, we're grounded in practice and partnerships. And we are focusing through, our focus is on the environmental dimensions, but it's always connected to development and grounded in human well-being and development, as is articulated in our mission, or sorry, in our vision. That we are independent, and what that means, in effect, we're not 100% independent. Nobody is, I think, but the government is appointing our board of directors, which is appointing me, etc. So there is a stage of control in there, but they are not controlling our agenda. And we don't have a preset political agenda, but we are following the evidence to solve problems around sustainability. And that we are a networked organization. We're not a formal bureaucracy where different parts do not speak to each other. We are actually combining through a number of mechanisms, competencies across the global organization. So the more, you could say, a fun part of the strategy document will be this early section talking about strategic priorities for the next phase. And we think it could have 3 parts. One is to describe which this will be developed over the next year, but what are at least some of our main initiatives over the coming period. But a more open section about new areas, new topics for building expertise. What we see on the horizon, what we need to address as an institute, without necessarily getting bogged down in how we do it. These are areas, methods or challenges or things that we think we need to move into based on our understanding of how the world is changing. And here I'm leaving it very open, and I really want to have kind of ideas coming from all over the organization about what we should have as inspiring areas here. And then a part that has to do with how we operate, which is more the how part, where we have things about explaining how we work in partnerships, explaining how we are ramping up our environmental policy, for example, which will actually have been done by then, but we should explain it in the strategy. So the next section, this is also then, it's a new area, that there are impact areas that we try to affect by existing. These can be derived from global policy documents, from declarations, from UN agreements, etc. And they need to be consolidated somehow. But this has been a problem for, the lack of this has been a problem for SIDA and the Ministry for the Environment throughout the last few years, because they don't see how we have an impact, even though we explain our outcomes and that we build capacity and we change policies, etc. They need to report back to their owners at this kind of level of impact, and they are very understanding, of course, that it's not so easy to measure that SEI has reduced global greenhouse gas emissions by 10,000 tons, or that we have lifted 2,000 people out of poverty in a program, etc. No, this is not possible. So it's contribution to these, but not attribution, but contribution. And that means that we describe the sort of pathways in a compelling way. Coming back to that in a minute. And these categories are not set in stone either, but somewhere we need to describe the long-term changes in society that we are here to actually contribute to. And this also solves the problem of content and the never-ending, everlasting discussion about topics and clusters and how to cut the cake when we present ourselves. Because we will never find a perfect solution there. And you've seen on the website today, there's a simple audience-oriented approach to energy, water, etc., which is not entirely sort of representative of our work, but it's a way for our audiences to come into SEI. But what we can do with this is that, okay, these are impact areas that are sort of a principle for us. Then different contents, whether it's gender studies, whether it's air pollution mitigation, sanitation, etc., these contribute to these. And the idea would be here to describe some of these main chains that we are aspiring to. And it's a bit a mix of sort of how we see ourselves and what we want to achieve in the next period. And of course, this also links back to initiatives that we want to invest in. We have a little bit of a mixed input from the board and the Science Advisory Council on regional focus, but it's been a signal from the ministry who wants to understand what we do in different regions. And are there certain regions that we prioritize, or are we just spreading ourselves all over the globe? No, I think we do prioritize certain regions. For example, we have established centers in certain places. And this matters. Doesn't mean that we don't take an opportunity to do a useful project in another region. But we might be able to explain in a little bit more detail what is it that we're doing, with whom, in certain key regions of the world. And here are some examples of this. Maybe it should be a longer list. Some of the SAC members argued we shouldn't describe this. And so interested to hear your input on this as well. Is it possible? Always when you define a strategy, you are risking sort of people that are doing something a little bit outside what's written down feel excluded. But at the same time, strategy must provide direction and focus without being sort of, doesn't mean that, as I said, it doesn't mean that we exclude other areas. But when I look at our portfolio and where we have kind of comparative advantage, I think these regions are pretty much the shortest list I could come up with. Theory of change. So need to explain a bit what does an organizational theory of change mean. It's not like at the project level where you can provide a detailed pathway of impact from your inputs to your activities to your outputs, outcomes, etc. It needs to operate at the kind of a meta level and provide a more broad template for the organization. It needs to include a problem description. But SEI has actually a knowledge-based approach to solving problems. We're not a political organization. We're not a profit-making business. We're trying to solve a knowledge problem. And if you don't think that there is a knowledge problem, then SEI shouldn't exist. Or we should transmute ourselves into a political movement or something. But so this is an assumption that we make, that knowledge is not available, useful, accessible, etc., in the forms that are needed to make better decisions. And that the theory of change is the basis for the results framework. So we keep the very tight link between how we measure our results and what we think our theory of change is. And this image shows a first cut at this to be ripped apart by you in the center workshops. No, not really. Actually, we think we are on the right track here, but we think we need tweaks and improvements and modifications. So looking forward to input on that. Good suggestion. I've already changed it once from green because it wasn't visible. Now it's visible, but not so pretty. So you have these impact categories all the way here. We have kind of boiled down our outcomes into 3 categories. Agendas, decisions, and capacities. That this is what we achieve in the outside world, that we are changing either informally, norms, awareness, etc., or formal policy agendas at different levels. We might even change actual decisions, which can be policy goals, can be instrument design, can be strategies, can be practice at household level or community level, but it's some sort of decision making that is traceable. And most importantly, we're changing capacities, so organizations that are equipped better to deal with the problem solving, stakeholder groups that might be marginalized, that we are empowering, or at the more broad level, strengthening institutions and governance processes. So all collected a little bit crudely into these category of capacities. So it's interesting to discuss with all colleagues whether, oh, actually I'm doing something entirely different. That I'm trying to achieve something that does not fit here. But I have looked around a bit so far, not come up with anything yet. But so how do we do this? This is what we do to achieve this is basically research and engagement activities on different partners, resulting in certain, you could say, performance, certain outputs, you could call it, or deliveries. We provide tools, we provide knowledge platforms, publications, but also processes that are impactful, co-production processes, various types of policy engagements or engagements with communities, digital channels of communication, training and capacity development programs, etc. Keen to hear also if you think you're doing stuff that doesn't fit here. So this is sort of activities going through to impacts. And the idea of a theory of change here is to sort of have a network of projects. Let's say all projects in the SEI somehow fit within this picture. And it might be a certain section of this that you are contributing to in your specific project. I don't think there are projects that do all of them, but I might be wrong. And then on the far left here, we have more internal factors that we would like to be better at, that we would like to trace in the coming period, which has to do with things like scientific excellence, our internal quality systems, our partnerships. And then what we want to do is to have a results framework, that is our annual reporting to the board and to SEDA, etc., which probes throughout this theory of change changes, effects. We're doing something. Are we doing this better? We're doing this better. Are we achieving better things here? It will be difficult to look here more than over a longer time period, but at least here we should measure what we can measure quantitatively. If it can't be quantitative, we write our stories, etc. Mindful of time, I'm going to basically end there, just to summarize that I see a chapter on the people, and we describe our increased ambition on a number of variables within the people agenda, that we are describing a more ambitious strategic orientation when it comes to our internal organization and governance. And you see some of the aspects here. And that I'll jump through to the last chapter, that we develop a much better learning system based on monitoring, evaluation, and learning. A process which actually contains 3 legs. The monitoring part, which is the data collection based on the results framework. The evaluation part, where we learn about how our theory of change is working and that what is our success factors and the do's and don'ts, etc. And the learning part, which is both practical issues that we can become better at learning from our activities. We're already doing a lot of them, but explaining what we will do more. But also a question of organizational culture, that this is actually not just about our systems and our data collection, but it's tied to how colleagues try to become better at having an impact and growing our capacities, and the individuals that work for us to enhance our impact in the long run. So this is a quick, it still took half an hour, but it's like a snapshot of the thinking right now. And we will make this presentation, it's completely consistent with the annotated outline, but we'll make it available for everybody and for the center workshops, so you can start to interpret, massage, and discuss these issues in more detail. And then we have a time plan so that center workshops will be reporting back to me by 10th of December. And then we will sit down and try to build towards a first draft, taking in the best comments. In the meantime, I will try to have as many conversations as possible with smaller groups. And I'll have a separate new one next week here in Stockholm where we can have a bit more discussion. And there will also be a center workshop here. And then I'm going to different places over the coming months to discuss further. So with that, actually, Åsa, I think we'll do it like this, that Åsa will present the part on how we move forward the initiatives, planning, and then we can have a joined up short Q&A as much as we have time for. Please.
Okay, so hello everyone here and everyone at other centers and anyone watching this film in the future. So this is really exciting to launch this call today, and we foresee a kind of period now of intensified discussions here and across centers. So today I will fairly quickly go through this call, which is in everyone's inbox as of today. So I suggest you read it carefully, digest it, and then I'm sure there will be many questions, and we have a kind of set up a space for that. So the call has been developed by the new Global Research Committee. It was a kickstart for the new committee. But we had some very good discussions, and we're also able to build on how it was done the last time around. So I'll just say something brief about the background, and then what is the purpose of an initiative? What are they? I think we know better, but there's always question marks. What's the process going to be for developing and sort of deciding on initiatives? The key criteria for reviewing them, and then what's the process going forward into the next year. So basically, as I said, we're opening up now for a hopefully very creative and innovative discussion, which does not sort of just jump to new and exciting topics, but also builds on something that we actually know something about, but we need to kind of deepen and want to go further and want to have more impact. As I think everyone knows, and this has been communicated in the spring, that the current set of initiatives will terminate by the end of next year. We will invite the bioeconomy, the city initiative and gender and social equality to reapply for a second period, the new strategy period. But otherwise, the current set, they are now have developed work plans for next year that will sort of end these initiatives and leave a legacy. We have also thought about the initiatives as a form of investment and way of working, and it's the strong perception of the senior management, of the board, the Scientific Advisory Council, and actually of the external review team, who have now presented the first kind of reporting that they have been very successful. So that's also, of course, a sign that everyone who's been working hard with initiatives have done a really great job. But the one sort of recommendation that has come through consistently is that they are perhaps too many. We need to have fewer and bigger. So what is an initiative? Well, I think starting with the purpose, it is, of course, to make a clear contribution towards SEI's mission. This is who we are, why we are here, to deliver on our mission statement. And we discussed this quite a lot in the GRC, that this is an excellent moment to road test this new theory of change that Måns presented on the red slide. So we will invite these concept notes to teams to try and, to apply these impact areas, to specify which are the ones, perhaps not the full list, but which are the ones that are key for your concept, and also how, what are the initial plans on different types of outcomes. So it's not the kind of full-fledged application of a theory of change. That will be much too early when we're talking about concept notes, but we want to get this kind of language into our systems early on. As Måns said, there might be tweaks to that theory of change, and we will, as we go forward with the initiatives, make sure that we are, kind of learning in this process and also adjusting what we're asking for. So the goal, so we want to build global knowledge leadership in these selected topic areas, and this is also the current goal with the current strategy. And to clarify what that means, we were thinking it's a thought leadership or knowledge leadership. Maybe there's no big difference, but I think knowledge leadership really sort of grounds us more in the idea of scientific knowledge. And it means the development and use of scientific research to influence agendas, decisions, and capacities as a means to have a positive impact on more sustainable development. I want to emphasize here, it's both development of research and use of research. So it's still very much about having performing policy engagement, capacity development. It's not just the scientific publications. And we have in this call quite a long list of defining features. I'm not gonna, I think, read through all of them, and some of them were taken from the call 5 years ago, so they will be familiar to you. It's about building on our strengths, what are our most compelling research tracks that we can further enhance. As Måns said, there will be a space in the strategy for the more kind of new areas. So there will be a place in the strategy for those as well. But initiatives, we want to build on strengths. Address knowledge gaps by applying, extending, and innovating SEI's toolkit. It has been really interesting and fascinating to see how the current initiatives have sort of gravitated towards developing tools, almost all of the initiatives. I think some perhaps did not even plan for that at the outset. But so this initiatives can innovate tools, but also apply and extend the existing ones. So there needs to be a clear demand for knowledge and identified partners and stakeholders with a view to build long-term research partnerships. This is a point that came up from our Scientific Advisory Council. It's sort of building on this, that we're not doing in and out research, case studies here and there, but we try to build long-term relationships with communities, the policymakers, so on. As I said, we would like the concept notes to apply this new organizational theory of change, and also to conduct work at appropriate levels and scales, in some case global, in some case very local, but also to try and place local work in a global context and vice versa. And this is also a comment made by the Scientific Advisory Council, that they feel that sometimes we do excellent kind of local case studies, but what do they say about the global level or national level? So we want this to be a bit more explicitly addressed in the concept note. And as before, the initiative should draw on a strong cross-center constituency of SEI researchers and demonstrate potential for leveraging external funds. So this is a long list, but we do aim high with the initiatives. We are ambitious. We also want you to think about the time horizon in light of Agenda 2030, the recent IPCC 1.5 report, where sort of 2030 is crystallizing as this sort of very important time frame. The initiatives will run for 5 years, potentially. So where do we need to be in 2025, and how will your initiative sort of be geared towards that? So jumping into the more practical aspects, process. The deadline is in roughly 3 months. Of course, with a Christmas break in the middle, but we hope that ideas will start cooking quite soon, and then January and February is a time for also focused kind of writing and working. But this is, of course, up to the teams. We will not accept late submissions, be quite strict on this. Typically, we are quite generous in the GRC, but I think to keep our deadline, we will have to have them by this deadline. And there will be 2 stages. The first is this concept note stage, and then full proposals. And the full proposals will be supported by a seed grant. And I really want to emphasize that now is the moment to focus on developing this very compelling concept. It's not about, sometimes when we write proposals for external funders, to kind of throw in lots of technical detail or sometimes name dropping, but it's really to explain why this is a great concept, why this is something SEI should do. So there will be lots of time later on to work fully through the work packages and the outputs and all these things. As before, it's an open call. Anyone really can start to form teams. It's a bottom-up process. We do encourage ideas from the bottom up, so to speak. But we will also, the GRC members will be active in this process and discuss with you, advise, try and facilitate links. We have decided that GRC members cannot lead initiative proposals, but can be part of teams. This is how it's been done in the past, and we do have initiative leaders on the GRC. This was also the case in the past. And obviously, if we will review a concept where a GRC member is part of the team, he or she will not be part of that review. This is how we always do it. These are the criteria for reviewing these concept notes. So we will look first and foremost of this potential for impact, and we will draw on the theory of change. So we do expect you to kind of use this language, start thinking in these terms, but again, it's not about perhaps applying it fully at this moment. That will come for the full proposal. We want to see that it builds on these recognized SEI strengths, and that it reflects clear needs and demands, and that these concepts identify a compelling niche, take an innovative approach. It's not just kind of business as usual. And that they need to include at least 2 centers. And we have added a new one. So one of these 2 centers, it can of course be more centers, need to be either Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And this is because we want to use this core funding and this opportunity to strengthen these centers and further use their expertise and build their expertise. And lastly, the potential for leveraging external funds. So here we come to even more practical issues. How are we doing with time?
We should wrap up now, perhaps.
Okay.
Time for questions.
Yeah. So this you will find in the call. And this is just an overview of what will happen next. So the rough timeline is that full proposals, that work will start maybe in April. We want full proposals by end of August so that the Science Advisory Council, they will meet in mid-September. They can review proposals, which will then again be revised. And then we launch these in January 2020. But I also want to say this is a kind of adaptive process, perhaps with some concepts we need a bit more time, the GRC and the team to discuss, develop. So, but as far as we can, we will keep it to this timeline. And it's all in the call. There is a space on Yammer where people can contact, say, okay, I'm interested in doing something on agriculture. If you want to have this sort of open communication across the institute, it's optional. And we will also here run a thread with frequently asked questions. So please, if you have questions, try and write them here, or if you send to me, I might copy them and place here. So, thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you. If you go back to the time frame, I would also just say, because I didn't go through, you've seen the timeline, but it's coming aligned here. So the final strategy document will be approved by the board October 2019, by which time we will be able to identify at least the initial set of initiatives that will go into the next strategy. So this will be iteration, but that comes to a natural sort of place here in October next year. Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. If you have something. Sorry, should I take this? Yes, for the floor, of course. Because we're taping this. There might be something coming from the global as well. Let me know. Okay. Grab it, yeah.
Yes, Kevin Adams, remotely joining, asks, what are the linkages, if any, between the initiatives and various hubs centers? Example, Sustainable Finance Center, Climate and Security Hub.
Those particular examples, the SSFC and the Climate and Security Hubs are, like any other projects at SEI, we have many projects, many of which relate to the initiatives in different ways. So I don't see anything specific about those examples. So in a way, they are operating according to their project plan and so on, but in a similar way that the initiatives have functioned currently, acting as sort of hubs, responding to new calls. So it's a little bit a mix of this internal funding and also external funding.
Thanks for presenting this challenging, interesting agenda. My question is regarding these impact areas. Are they taken from the Stockholm conference, UN meeting, and the SDG? How are they sort of being developed, and are there any sources that we can sort of look into and get a feeling for how you were thinking there?
Yes, they are taken from the Stockholm Declaration and the 2030 Agenda. And it's also about recognizing the connections between them, because obviously the 2030 Agenda contains a lot of aspects that SEI is not focusing on. say, industrial development or education, etc., insofar as only when it relates to environmental dimensions. I recommend everybody to just look at the Stockholm Declaration on Wikipedia, where you have a good summary of it, and it's quite interesting to see. It's pretty compelling still. Brundtland Commission didn't add that much new to the Stockholm Declaration. Even the definition of sustainable development, which is often mentioned in the Brundtland as the Brundtland, it's almost exactly the same language in the Stockholm Declaration. I found quite interesting. But we cannot get stuck in 72. This is sort of, we need to update our understanding of the problematique, but it's a good reference point for us. Francis.
The monitoring, evaluation, and learning it requires a lot of infrastructure to carry out. Is the idea to eventually have like one person who runs that, basically?
We have a task force that is looking into these systems, as you know, cross-center task force, and they will look into the question of what kind of personnel and money we need to run this properly. My hunch is, yes, you need one of those, actually. And we are, as an institute, I think like many institutes, not investing enough in this. I think it's definitely a core funding worthy activity. I learned recently Marie was in touch with ODI, who have a whole department on M&E, who's both doing the internal M&E work as well as publishing in this field, etc. So yes. Anyone else? Sarah?
I just wanted to note that, maybe there's an increased focus on health, and I think it's important to reconsider the lack of ethics review process for publishing anything in the health sector, which is impossible.
Yeah.
So lack of ethics review
SEI, in SEI, you mean?
Generally.
Yes, like
yeah.
a formal ethical review process for research protocols.
Yeah, yeah. And this has been in the works for a long time. I'm really happy to say that Fiona and Marie are now looking at how it can be implemented and for the initiatives it will for sure be a step. At least I think at the full proposal stage.
Ian, there was someone else on the line.
Correction that it was IDS Sussex, not ODI.
That is correct. Sorry, Marie. She's always watching over. Henrik.
Måns, initially you said that the mission statement could stay the same, bridging science and policy. At the same time, I hear more and more discussions about the role of businesses in transformation, and you also mentioned that. Do you foresee a slightly change in our attitude and our working procedures towards businesses in the new strategy?
The mission statement is saying policy. So that's one question. I think that we need to think about policy if we're not changing it in a broad term, as a very broad concept, including the agenda setting, etc., in amongst non-public policy actors. But then the second part of your question was whether we will change how we interact with businesses in the next strategy period.
Yeah, I see a development that more and more people stresses the role of businesses in transformation, and people also stresses that the sector we belong to have problems in interacting with businesses.
And I think we have been leaders here in Stockholm in how to engage in a constructive but yet independent way towards business. And we have a kind of a business engagement policy that we can improve. I see this would be I think there is a big opportunity to apply this kind of work in different parts of the world more than we do today. So, for example, in the Asia office, they are working quite diligently in trying to develop these linkages today. So, but I think here in Stockholm, it's been a strong leadership in this way today. It requires, I think, a constant learning and assessment process when we engage in a new partnership, and we have certain principles for how to do it. But I would also say that if we work with states or with NGOs, we always have to keep in mind these principles because they also have interests, and we might be used in ways that we didn't expect or do not want to see. So it's actually a general question of how we work. But sometimes it comes more to the forefront when we start talking with the business. Anyone else? No. Okay, good. Thank you. As you see, you guys here in Stockholm, there's a slot next week as well where we can continue the conversation. I think it's good to, we might arrange the room a little bit differently and so on. But this is a formal process, but I also want to try to have as many informal conversations as possible to get as much useful input as possible as well. Okay. Any final words from the world? No. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, listening. Cheers.